Mike, take it away.
Awesome. I appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll be able to see the presentation. I know when Nate was thinking of mistakes that product people make, I was the first person that came to mind. I don't know why that was. No, it didn't work out like that. No, I was really appreciative of Nate to invite me to speak here. And by the way, can y'all see my screen right now? Just make sure it's okay. Good. Yeah, as Nate had mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Product Collective, and we're a community for product people too. So, just the same types of things that Mind the Product has done for a while, we've been doing for a while too. One of the independent product communities out there. At this point, I think we have 31,000 people from around the world that have been a part of Product Collective one way or the other, whether they're getting our newsletters or attending our video chats, or coming to our conferences. It was cool to get to hear from, earlier, one of our attendees that have attended the conference, and actually looking at the list, I see some familiar names that are on the attendee list here. So for those of you that are already a part of Product Collective, I appreciate that. For those that aren't, I hope that you check it out too. It's a free community to be a part of. So I'm the organizer of Industry, the product conference. That's probably the biggest thing that we've done ever since 2015. We've organized, I think, 11 editions of Industry to date in the US, in Cleveland, Ohio in particular. That's where we have our global edition of Industry. Also in Europe, we've organized now 3 European editions in Dublin, Ireland. And actually the last European edition was March 9th through 11th, 2020. And I think it was the night of the 11th when the world closed down, or at least it felt like the world closed down. It was like I got back to my room after the conference and it's like, Tom Hanks has it. The NBA's canceled. It was like everything that night. So kind of wild that we put on probably the last conference in all of Ireland until probably recently. Aside from that, we also now organize the New York Product Conference. So we took that over. We acquired it last year, and we're excited to get back to in-person conferences this year. April 7th, we have New York Product Conference, and then in September's Industry. So pumped for that. I also co-host Rocketship.fm. It's a podcast that we've had for the last several years. Product Collective partners with Michael Saka, who's my co-host for it. And I don't know the exact, I think we've done like 500 some episodes at this point. I've been a part of it for more than half of those. Michael started that podcast a few years back, and I joined it and have had a great time with it. Actually, we're coming up on our, I think our 12th season, 13th season. It's going to focus on Web3. So I'm kind of pumped about that. I also teach at Case Western Reserve University. In fact, I introduced their first ever undergraduate product management class at Case. We're not like Carnegie Mellon, where they have an entire master's program focused on product management, which I think is so amazing. I mean, most schools don't even have a class quite yet on product management. So it's pretty awesome now that Carnegie Mellon has that program that they do. And yeah, I enjoyed being on campus there speaking at ProductTank, or rather Product Camp Pittsburgh in the past. That was a lot of fun. But today I'm going to talk about mistakes that product people make. Usually when I go and give talks, I'm talking about like, hey, I'm presenting on this thing that I'm an expert on, or at least I should be, right? And I'm usually in front of people sharing the things that we ought to be doing. Instead, today I'm going to focus on things that we shouldn't be doing, these mistakes, because really what I've kind of reflected on, I've personally interviewed 326 product people over the last 4 years. And that includes the podcast Rocketship. It includes our industry interview series, which you see me on the left there, a little screenshot. Actually, it looks pretty familiar, right? It's like exactly the spot I'm in right now, just a different shirt. So at least it's proof I don't always wear an industry t-shirt like I am in that picture. But it's been a lot of fun for me. I love interviewing people. I have interviewed a lot of people on stage. I sometimes MC events and product conferences, our own, but others as well. And that's maybe my favorite part, because when I first got into product, I definitely was not that person that said, you know what, I belong here. I know everything there is to know. And now, I'm here. I'm a product person. When I got into product a few years back, I remember when I got recruited, I kind of was starting to talk them out of it. I said, hey, look, I don't know if I'd be perfect for this role. I never went to school for product management. And they're like, oh no, Mike, you'll be fine. Nobody went to school for product management. It's okay. And so I took the job, that first job. I remember I was director of product for a ticketing company. We did ticketing for pro sports teams and college sports teams. But in my mind, I'm like, but what happens when they figure out I don't know what I'm doing? And so the best way for me to sort of figure out how to be a product person on the fly, by the way, because I had this new product role, was talking to other people that have been there and they've done it before. And so I reflected back on all these interviews that I've done, and I chose 10 interviews in particular. And in each of those interviews, I almost always ask the question, well, what mistakes either did you make, or what mistakes do you often see? So when I'm interviewing for people for our industry interviews series, for instance, every single time I'm interviewing them, it's on a specific topic. It might be on productivity or product discovery or focusing on your career. Every single time, though, I ask, what mistake do you often see made? And the reason I ask it is that I've made a ton of these mistakes when we talk about all those categories. But I want to highlight these mistakes that are being made so that others that are going through that process right now, maybe the Mike Belsito from a few years ago who's just breaking into product, or maybe somebody who's been in it for a while but needs that sort of refresh, they can understand what those mistakes are. Maybe that they can avoid making them too. Or maybe even today, the 2022 Mike Belsito, can avoid making some of these mistakes. So I highlighted 10 of these here, and I'm going to go kind of go 10 in a row here, and then we'll wrap things up, and happy to chat more with you if there's questions or what have you. The first conversation I'm going to highlight is one I had with Josh Annan. Now, Josh is a product leader at Roblox, and Josh has had a company. Actually, when I first met Josh, he was a product leader at Magic Leap, VR, AR company. Josh has worked in gaming before. He's worked for Pixar. And so he's had a lot of different product roles. Now he's in a product leader role. And the big mistake that Josh said he often sees made is that people are often too prescriptive. And by that, I asked Josh to sort of dig in on that. It's like, well, what do you mean by that? Well, product people have a tendency to just assume they have the right answer, and probably for good reason, right? Like we've worked hard to get into these roles that we've had. We have a lot of great experience. Many of us do. And so sometimes we might have gone through situations before where we feel like, okay, there's this problem that's popping up. We might know the exact answer here. We might be able to prescribe what that answer is right on the spot. Josh cautions against that though, right? Like we weren't really hired to have all the answers. That's not really what we were hired to do as product people. We definitely want to get to the right answer. We want to arrive at the right answer. That doesn't mean that we have to be the ones bringing the right answer to the forefront. So it's a big mistake that Josh believes happens often, where we feel like as product people, we have to be the ones coming up with the answers, when really we have an engineering team we could turn to. We have a customer success team. We have a sales team. Well, lots of folks on our teams that we could be turning to and should be turning to. And so how do we avoid this mistake? We can avoid this mistake by making it a habit to involve other stakeholders in the community, especially during discovery. And discovery is actually another topic that's going to come up here. But during that process, we should not be the only ones involved. We should be opening up to the rest of the team and making sure that input from all these other stakeholders are part of the process, so we can bring these good ideas out, but they might not come from our brains. And really, it's spending time throughout the entire year with different departments that you might not spend time with often enough. If you really review the folks that you're spending time with, if you are thinking of certain people in your company where you're like, I don't really deal with that department. Maybe it's a department you feel like it's not necessarily so relevant for a product. I challenge you to maybe make a change, maybe challenge yourself to take a person to lunch in that department, or have a virtual chat, whatever it's going to be, but get on that person's radar. By the way, I don't have the chat open. Maybe Nate, if you can let me know if there's a question that pops up that's worth me talking about right on the spot, I'm happy to do it. I can't really see the chats as they come in until unless I go bloop and then cancel my full screen. But you let me know, Nate. Okay, cool. All right. So on to the next topic that I'm going to cover here, which is managing early products. Now, some of us are managing products that have been around for a very long time. Some of us, we came into the company, we came into the roles where these products have existed for years and years. But maybe it's at those companies. Maybe it's at a startup company we might join where we might introduce a new product. And I remember talking to Jeff Morris Jr. Now, Jeff has been a product person in the past. He's now the founding partner at Chapter One. It's a venture firm. It's kind of a solo venture firm. He also has a venture program specifically focusing on product-minded founders. And what he's seen is that so many early products, they try to be so many different things to so many people. And that could be a giant mistake. He's noted that the best ones, they tend to do very few things, but do them really, really well. And I remember when Jeff and I were having this conversation, it got me to thinking about, well, what products do I really admire today? And, I think of like Cash App as an example. That's an app that I use to send money to friends, or maybe it's babysitters, or dog walkers, whatever it's going to be. I've used that. I've used other apps for that kind of thing too. But I remember when Cash App came out, first of all, it wasn't called Cash App. It was just Square Cash. And there wasn't an app. There wasn't a dashboard. I wasn't connected with my friends. Literally, you would email somebody, CC whatever the email was. I can't remember the exact email. And in the subject line, you'd put the money you're going to send to them. And that's it. It would send them money. Like you'd sign up in advance and connect your bank account, but that was it. It just did that one thing. You're not logging on and seeing all the payments you made. You're not seeing a feed of all your friends and payments that they're making like some other apps do. It just did that one thing, but it did it really, really well. And actually, I remember that at first time using it, I'm like, this kind of feels like magic. Like I'm just emailing this person and it just gave them money like that from my bank account. Like it's pretty cool. And so what Jeff said resonated with me. I've also seen products where it tries to do all sorts of things. And by the way, I've lived this one, right? I remember one of my first product roles working at a company where we made a fitness tracker and also had a dashboard that encouraged teams to do fitness challenges. And we'd try to pack in so many features. We totally made this mistake. We totally tried to make all these features that people might like. The problem is when you pack in all these features, people have to sift through so many of the nice to haves before they can get to that one feature that's really going to wow them. And you end up losing people that way. So focus on what's most important. What is the big thing that you're trying to do? And, another way to think of it is, what can you be the best in the world at? Is there one thing that you could be potentially the best in the world at? Maybe focus on features that could really allow you to do that, as opposed to in those early days, trying to focus on so many different things. Something to think about there. I'm going to move on to the next topic on prioritization. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the last one. I talked to Sophie Lalonde. Now she's at Product Board, and we had a whole conversation about prioritization. And one of the things that stood out to her is that people often are just trying to prioritize so many different things. She said, if you're trying to prioritize 100 different things, you might want to reconsider what it is that you're trying to accomplish. You're probably overdoing it. Now, that stood out to me because oftentimes, time management can be a very big challenge for us, not just in our day-to-day, but even for product related work, right? Like we're trying to, we have a roadmap, right? But we also have all these feature requests. We have all these bug requests that are popping up. And I have fallen into this trap too, where all of a sudden I'm like, okay, there's 418 things that need to happen with the product. Now, what Sophie suggests is that if you really just try to think of what are the metrics that really moves the needle for you, right? Like there shouldn't be a million metrics, right? There should be really a handful that's driving us. Well, what can really move those metrics? Focus on those things. Chances are, if you did have 418 things on your list that you're trying to prioritize, maybe 80% of those don't even matter. And it's just kind of wasted time that you're spending trying to prioritize those things where if you didn't even accomplish them, nobody would even notice. So really think about what are the metrics that are going to move that needle most for the things that really matter most, and sift those things to the side or sift all the things that sort of don't fit that to the side and just focus on what is really going to move that needle. Product discovery. I mentioned this before. SK Srinivas goes as SK. He's also at Product Board, SVP of Product at product board, and we were talking about discovery. And oftentimes what SK saw is that, and it's not an intentional thing. This is something that product people do and they're not meaning to do, but they get into the discovery process. And hopefully, by the way, it's not really a phase, right? We should always be in discovery one way or the other. It's not something that ever ends, but they let their own biases sort of get into that process and really sort of rule the process. Now, the way that SK said it is that, again, most of this time, it's not that they're trying to. It's not that when you're approaching a customer conversation or maybe it's a focus group or whatever it's going to be, but you're in that discovery process. You're not saying to yourself, okay, I know what's best, and I'm going to go into this and just steamroll our customers and tell them what they need. Nobody's doing that. Nobody's doing that. But what they are doing is possibly coming into these situations with some preconceived solutions already in their mind. Maybe it's something that they realize, like, okay, I think I have an inkling for what this solution should be, or maybe not. Again, maybe it's something that is more of a unconscious bias, but they're letting that bias seep through, and it could be a big mistake, because really all those discovery meetings that we're having, the discovery, whether, again, those focus groups, one-on-one customer development meetings, those kind of get thrown away because all of a sudden you're letting your biases kind of come through. So how do you avoid that mistake? What SK suggested was having more open-ended questions during that discovery process, so you don't lead people to a potential solution. And you got to force yourself, going into it. Okay, what are these open-ended questions that I'm going to ask that I could stick to? Not that you have to have a defined script, but it's a good idea to at least have open-ended questions you could turn back on and at least rely on to sort of help lead the conversation. Now, another thing that he suggested is that, get other people involved in the process. And hopefully we are, right? Like we've talked about this a little bit before. Hopefully this isn't a one-person show discovery, right? Like this should be something that, the entire product team is synced up with, and people outside of the product team too. So sometimes going into these conversations and immediately afterwards having a conversation with somebody else that was a part of that process to say, okay, what did you get from that? That could be super helpful. I mean, so many times, and I've been a part of conversations like this where you go through a discovery meeting and I jot down my notes, and then the next time I do it with somebody else, the same sort of meeting, it feels like the same result for me. But we have that conversation and they say, oh, I actually took something out of that completely different from what you said. My notes look different than what the other person's notes were. And we have a conversation about why that is. And actually it makes sense, because our notes might be different because our own biases are sort of ruling what we're writing down. But when we're able to have that conversation, we're able to get to a place where maybe we're finding that the real answers, from the customers, but it takes that other person to help us pull those real answers out. And it takes that sort of, post customer conversation to even get to that place. So this conversation with SK, it rings true with me, just having gone through that process myself in the past. Productivity. So I had a conversation with Nitin Jolka. Now, Nitin is a product leader, a senior product manager at LinkedIn. And our whole conversation was around productivity. And I remember coming to that conversation with a lot of questions in mind, because look, I feel like every day, and with COVID, I feel like it's gotten worse actually, right? But I feel like every day I'll end the day and I'm like, I just didn't get enough done. And it's a dejecting feeling to feel like you didn't get enough done. And, I go into a week where I have 5 days in a row like that. And yeah, of course, we're happy for the weekend to come around, because it feels like we didn't really do our jobs that entire week. What Nitin reminded me of, though, is that product managers often take on so much work, and often it's too much. We overload ourselves. Not to say that we're doing too much work per se, but we're setting unrealistic expectations of ourselves. And what I remember, one of the things Nitin said is that, hey, at the beginning of a day, what he tries to do is say, what's one thing
that if I could accomplish today, I'd feel like, you know what? This was a win of a day. And that's always been a big problem for me. I think a big mistake that I've always made is I said, okay, here are the 50 things that I need to accomplish today to feel like I've got a win for today. And then you end the day and you got 15 out of those 50 done. And you feel like, you feel like a jerk. You feel like you weren't doing your job, when really, if you look, it's like, okay, you've done 15 things. Was one of those 15 things though a pretty big deal? Or did you get done 15 things that were not monumental at all, and one of those big deal items was left off? Like, those are two different situations. So now how I like to approach the day and the week is saying, what are those couple of things? What are the few things I need to get done today? But what's the one thing where I'm like, okay, if everything got derailed, but I got this one thing done, would I feel good? And I do that for the week too. Now, for the week, it might be a bigger goal. It might not be just a task. It might be accomplishing something bigger. Maybe it's a series of tasks that leads up to a bigger bucket, if you will. And one thing that I've started to do is, with Product Collective, we have Slack group, and, every day I don't know how many people are logging in every single day, probably dozens, if not more. But people coming in to trade ideas and best practices, and it's free. Anybody could join it. Everybody here could join it. I've been starting at the beginning of every week, putting out what my big thing was for the week that I wanted to accomplish, and inviting people to do the same. And it's been cool to see, these last few weeks, people start to share. And then at the end of the week, getting to share like, hey, I did it. I did the thing that I was hoping I was going to do. And you know what? I've gone into weekends feeling a lot better for myself, when really, if I look back, it's not like I wasn't productive before, but I was probably putting too much weight on my shoulders. And, the problem with that is when we start to take on so many things, we say yes to everything, and we're trying to accomplish so much, we end up doing something that runs counter to the reason we said yes to all those things in the first place, or that we put so many things on our list in the first place, which is we're trying to be productive, right? But the other big fallback that and mistake, I guess, that people have in this process is, if we do take on too many things and we try to accomplish so many things, chances are we're going to not do a very good job at all of those things, right? So it's staying focused on what are the few things we want to accomplish and do them really, really well, instead of trying to do too much and not doing a great job at any of those things. All right, we got that's half of the things that I wanted to cover today. We've covered, so we're kind of hitting the home stretch here. So I want to keep moving forward. Nate, are we good? Or any questions pop up? Do you feel like it's work? Okay, cool. I'm going to keep plowing forward here. The next topic is on being data informed. And actually, I just had this conversation just like a couple of weeks ago with Ruben Ugarte. Now, Ruben, he actually spoke at the virtual edition of Industry, the product conference that we had probably about a year ago or so. And then more recently, I had him on for an industry interview. And it was a great topic because we were talking about, everybody likes to be data informed, right? Or data driven. And, data is a hot thing right now, right? Like I feel like data is supposed to be every product manager's, superpower and secret weapon, whatever you want to call it. And Ruben is like, when it comes to data, he's one of the people I think of. He has a company called Practico Analytics. Companies turn to him to help shape analytics strategy. He's the guy, when it comes to data, or one of the guys that are out there. But what he said is that people often make a big mistake here. People often think that having access to so much data helps us feel more confident when we make our decisions, which makes sense, right? We want to be data-driven or data-led. He says it's often the opposite. Having so much data ends up making us less confident about our decisions. We drown ourselves in the data, and sometimes we get caught up and we just don't even know what to do. And this made me think about the times, at least that, I was trying to think back, have I made this mistake before? And it definitely rings true. And actually, I thought of the analog, not in the product world, but my everyday life. Like, let's just imagine for a minute that, if I guess going back to the product world, if we were in a situation where we had, okay, there's 50 different metrics that we're tracking, and we need to be in tune with all 50 of these metrics, and we're going to collect data on all these 50 metrics. it's kind of impossible to really keep track of it all. And the analog I'll draw from the non-product world is, imagine driving, right? We're driving around every day. There's a couple metrics we really need to track. There's a couple dashboards that are literally on our dashboard that we need to look at. Speed, how fast are we going? Because don't want to get pulled over, don't want to get a ticket. How much gas do we have? It's pretty important. Do we need an oil change? Pretty important. We know we run out of gas more often than running out of oil, but we know we need to be paying attention to that too. Imagine if you look down and on that dashboard, you saw 50 dials, and every day they were at different places. And maybe there's one for, how inflated are my tires, but there's also one for what's the temperature of the armrest. We don't really need to know that, right? If there's 50 different dashboards, we might never know if we're speeding or not, because there's so many things that we need to track that we can't even tell if we're speeding, or we can't even tell if we're about to run out of gas. So when I was having this conversation with Ruben, it sort of made me realize, like, okay, I think you're onto something here. I if I was tracking so much data that I didn't really necessarily need to make a decision, it could really just clog things up. So what Ruben suggested is focus on just those core metrics that actually matter. We've heard this before when it came to priorities. And before you start analyzing all that data, just ask yourself, what do you actually need to make a decision, right? I mean, I know when I'm driving, seeing that little dial, when I see the light go on, that's important. Or my Jeep now tells me exactly how many miles, I'm going to go before I need gas. That's really important. That's the data I need to make a decision. I probably don't need 50 different reports additional beyond that to make a decision about going to get gas. So think about, what does going to get gas mean for you and your product? What are those core metrics, and focus on those. I'm going to go to the next topic of coaching product people. I had a great conversation with JJ Rory on this. I think we did an industry interview. I know I was also on JJ's podcast. She's got a great podcast too. And one of the things that she saw happens often, and she doesn't see this as much with professional coaches. She sees it with usually new product leaders that are just starting to coach product people. And when you're starting to coach product people, sometimes what happens is you have a person you're working with, and some sort of strategy you used works. And that's great. Like, right, you've coached them and you did the thing. You're now encouraging them, and it's working. Whatever you suggest to them, it's working. The urge that people have, though, is to use that same strategy with the next person and the person after that. And when the reality is, every sort of product person, we're all different. We all have different motivations. Even if we're at the same level, I might be, have a few years of experience. Somebody else has a few years of experience, but we might have totally different motivations. I remember actually talking to somebody where at their company, they were talking about managing product people, and they had a couple people on their product team. One person was a product leader, or rather they wanted to be a product leader. Like that was what they were aspiring to be. Like their 10-year plan was to, become a director and then a head of product and a VP and go down that path. It was something that they really, really wanted. They had another person on the team that actually had more experience than that person, but their goal was not to be a VP of product. They wanted to be a product. They wanted to be like deep in the product their whole career. They never wanted to be a VP and manage other people. And by the way, not because they, weren't motivated to do that. It's just that's what they realized about themselves, is they were a great product person. But on the managing side, they just didn't really want that. And guess what? The good thing about product is that's okay. We need people like that are amazing product people, and they want to stay that. That's great. And they can have senior positions that help them do that very, very well. So you can motivate both of those individuals, but you're going to need to do it differently. You could coach both of those individuals, but you're going to need to do it differently. They have different motivations. They have different things that are really important to them. So a mistake is doing it all the same. How do we avoid this mistake? Just having conversations with these folks, really just getting to know them, understanding that everybody is different. we all want to empower product people, right? If we get to these product leadership roles, being able to empower our teams, it's really important to us. But what empowering means to one product manager might mean something different to the next product manager. And that's what we need to make sure we're focused on. The eighth topic we're going to cover here is what it's like to join a new team. And I had that conversation with Adam Thomas, another former industry speaker. He's lead product manager at Smart Recruiters. And kind of, this is along the same lines. Whenever we're joining a new team, could be joining a new company, could be moving from one team to another inside of a company that you're already working for. One of those big urges is to make changes fast. And we hear this often. Sometimes the advice we get is like, find a quick win, get those quick wins. And sometimes those changes might seem pretty obvious to us, but first you have to gain the trust of your team before you're going to make those changes. If you start making changes without gaining the trust of your team, even if you've changed a process that needs changing, it might not have the same effect that you think it's going to have. Now, so sometimes we'll hear the conversation like, well, this is the way we've always done things. And it might be easy for us to be like, we should never say that, right? Like, just because it's the way that we've always done things, that doesn't mean we should do them that way. And that's true. That's true for sure. But it doesn't mean you need to change that way immediately. At least dig in. Okay, why was it always done this way? It doesn't mean that it ought to continue to be done that way, but we need to understand the why. We need to earn our team's trust before we just start making changes right away. So it's a conversation that's always stood out with me with Adam. And even, today, joining different groups that I'm a part of, I try to make sure, okay, I'm not going to come in guns blazing with, hey, I think we should change some processes here. I want to make sure I can really get to know the team first. Two more here. And these two are going to be related to each other too. This is on the topic of customer relationships. I recently had a conversation with Amanda Getz. I've had many conversations over the last couple of years with Amanda Getz. She's the founder and CEO of House of Wise. House of Wise is a different kind of product than many of us are managing. It's a CBD product, and it specifically focuses on women. And I would call it a premium brand too, an aspirational brand. Now, of course, they have a digital product too. They're a direct-to-consumer e-commerce website. So there's multiple facets here. What Amanda's seen in particular, though, is that oftentimes there's a big mistake made when we treat customers in a transactional way, when we really just think of them as customers. And the only time we're having conversations with them is when we want them to buy our products, right? Now, I would like to think that as product people, this isn't a mistake that we're making often. But I also know better. I also have, been on product teams before where sometimes this gets forgotten. This gets lost on us. And, at House of Wise, the way that they get around this, the way that they try to counteract this is they created their own community. They call it Wise Women. Now, it's a community that is in part helping them sell their products. So these wise women that House of Wise they mobilize, they bring to life. These are people that are out there sharing the House of Wise brand with other people in their networks and getting them to buy. Not any different than, back in the old days, you might remember the Tupperware clubs or my mom did the same thing with candles, and so there is that. But with House of Wise, it's more than that. It's not just about selling. It's about empowering these women to also be people that could help them shape the product. These are conversations they have with these wise women where they're in product conversations. Actually, they're giving input to the product team on maybe what features need to come next, what new products they should be launching next. It's not to say you have to do everything that this group says, but it's, at least in Amanda's mind, it's treating their own customers as a part of their team. They're co-creating with them. That's how they sort of stop themselves from making this mistake of just treating customers in a transactional way. But to bring it home, I'll come to the final topic to cover, which is actually on communities. And I had a conversation with Georgina Donahue. Actually, if I remember right, it's the first industry interview we did after COVID struck. I remember I was probably still a little jet lagged from coming back from Ireland back in spring of 2020. But what Georgina reminded me of is that, Georgina works at Pragmatic Institute. They have their own community of product people too. And communities are hot right now, right? Like in terms of as a vertical kind of a business, community is something that VCs are investing in. Communities are something that almost every company is creating their own community. But the mistake that companies make when they try to start their own community is not aligning their goals with their community's goals. Sometimes what happens is these communities, they'll say, all right, this is hot right now. It's the next big thing. We need one of our own. And so they'll whip up their community, but they don't really think about what their community needs. They think about what they need. They think about, how are we going to sell more product? Let's do it through the community. Now, in the case of House of Wise, they're wise women. They wanted to feel empowered. They wanted to feel like they had a voice, that they could be a part of growing something special. Now, not every community necessarily would feel like that. It's important to understand, what are your community's goals? What's important to the people that you're trying to build this community for? Is it even possible to align those goals with yours as a company? If not, you might want to rethink community as as sort of a feature of your product or of your organization. But if you can align those two things, you could probably avoid this mistake. So again, I know I went through 10 different mistakes that product people make. Truth is, I've probably made all these mistakes and a whole lot more. I do want to kind of call out, these are ways that we could keep the learning going. Again, that Product Collective Slack I mentioned before, it's just a way that a lot of people like to sort of check themselves throughout the year. Like, hey, is this a mistake I'm making? Let me go talk to my friends who are in product. And not to be too overly promotional here, Nate, but New York Product Conference Industry, these would be in-person ways to do it as well. And you could learn more there. But yeah, that's really all I had. You could also reach me at any time at mike@productcollective.com. I just figured I'd share my email there if anybody wanted to keep the conversation going. But that's really, Nate, in terms of presentation, that's really all I had.
All right, thank you, Mike. I enjoyed that, and I've had some people hit me up directly saying they enjoyed it as well. So at this point, I think this is where we open it up to say, are there any questions? There's been a lot of talking, chatting. I guess it's not talking, a lot of talking, chatting going on. Anybody have things they want to share or questions for Mike? Please take this time to do that.
If anybody has mistakes that they didn't see here, but they thought are worth sharing so we can all avoid them, that'd be pretty cool too.
What if somebody really needs a lot of help? No.
Go on.
I wouldn't mind a Cliff's Notes. So let me give you a Cliff's Notes version of the conundrum I am in currently and see if I could get any advice from a product perspective. So I've recently started with a new company. I'm in my 6th week. And I'm a product owner, a fairly green, I would consider myself, only about 2.5 going on 3 years as a product owner. So during that time, I've been fortunate enough to work with some really good product teams that are just, were fantastic, that, I was a part of that team, and we were implementing working software every 2 weeks. Truly, but it really can be done, right? And then working with some teams and companies that just can't figure that out. And this is one of them. And I didn't realize until after I'd started that there's just, there was a big, huge change in leadership and a reduction in staff, and then a product they had worked on is to develop an entire new essentially a new database, and was scrapped when this new leadership came on. So now we have this issue where a huge trust issue. So people have been working on something for 2 years now, has been totally scrapped. 20% of the people were gone. I'm the new person coming in who I feel like is fairly well educated when it comes to Agile and Scrum, and really am wanting desperately to help and help kind of get that going. But a couple of things that I'm dealing with. Number one, I'm not allowed to talk to any of our customers, period. Our customers hate us because we promised to deliver software that was never built. So this is all prior to me coming on, obviously. Didn't know any of this. And now I was finally introduced the last week to my team, which is completely consultant, all remote, all over the world, and was so excited to finally being able to have a team that I could start developing that relationship with and maybe making some changes, right? Even if they were incremental. However, the way they have it set up is that we have one person who is a consultant, but he is onshore. And I get to talk to him a half an hour a day, period. That's my team. And I'm reporting to a VP of product who is walking this really eggshell kind of arena where there's this huge transition, not much trust, a green leadership, but they're calling themselves a product-led company, except they're pushing down, everything that absolutely needs to be done. So I guess my question with all of that, kind of contextually, is I'm at this point going like, do I run for the hills? Do I use this as a fantastic learning opportunity and see if I can overcome the odds and truly make some positive change? And I'm struggling, and I need to know if I need to kind of like just, if you have any experience here, am I just a lost cause? And yeah, so I'm just very frustrated and discouraged and just unsure.
Yeah.
So any advice?
When I can weigh in, but I also feel like everybody here would have just as good of advice as I would here. What I would say is the positive is that there are so many other product organizations that are looking for great people right now. That is one positive. I think the one question you asked is like, do you look at it as a learning opportunity, or do you just run? And, not to say that you have to run, but I guess you can ask yourself, what can you really learn from a situation like this? Like, is it even possible? I mean, there's some situations where, there might be a real possibility to change product culture, that you're brought in to shape it. And if top leadership they understand that that's an issue. But if you feel like, and that's only a question you can answer, if you feel like leadership doesn't even understand that that's the issue, and that could be a very big hill to climb. I will say, when I was looking at chat or even pictures, I think I saw a lot of people saying run, a lot of head shaking no. I don't know. I don't know that I have a magic answer here for this one. It doesn't sound like an awesome situation. I'm sorry that you're in that situation.
No, it is. And I'll say just a follow-up comment, or maybe even question, and that is that it's made me really gun shy. So I know there's a lot of product opportunities out there, but I don't want to put myself in another position where, I'm with a job for 6 weeks and I'm already looking for another job. So that's kind of where I'm at. I know there's a lot of opportunity, and it's not like I didn't do my homework. It just was, this is a private company, and there was a lot of things that weren't available to be seen until I got into it.
Yeah. I've been there, by the way. And so when I was in that situation, by the way, my mic switched. So can you still hear me actually? Okay.
Okay.
That situation, I actually remember approaching the CEO directly 30 days in, maybe it was less than that, and saying like, I I don't think I'm the right fit here. And I was prepared for that to leave that day, because I'm like, I know going in to have a conversation like this, that might not go so well in certain places. And he convinced me to stay, he didn't convince me to stay until a certain time, but he kind of said the right things to encourage me to stay for at least a little bit longer. And I was able to see one product launch through, but I'll tell you what, like, I ended up leaving after 9 months. And so whether I left 30 days in or 9 months in, I don't know if it really would have made a difference. It did let me, I was able to, probably that entire time I had my eyes looking elsewhere in case, because it didn't feel right to me that entire time. And so I guess when the right opportunity did come up, I took it. But what I can tell you is in that 9 months time, it's not like things magically changed. Even with me trying to brute force it every single day, you could make a much bigger impact than I did. But that was what happened with me in the past.
And I think the one thing I would add is I was in a similar situation, and it was fun. I'll never forget this. First day on the job, I got home. I was super excited. Got home. My wife was like, "How was it?" And I was like, "I don't think I'm going to be there very long." Like, I knew on the first day it didn't feel right. But at the same time, I was like, wait a minute now. Like, let's not panic. Let's not run for the hills. Like, let's give myself 6 months. Like, and maybe 6 months is too long. Maybe it wasn't long enough. I don't know. But I felt like I needed to give it an honest shake to say, did I give it my all? And I ended up saying 15 months. Definitely the hardest job I've ever had from a cultural perspective. Like, I felt like I just beat my head up against the wall for 8, 9, 10 hours. And then I went home. Like, and then the next day I went back and I did the same thing. So super hard. But I learned in that time, I learned so much about, like, you learn new tricks because, you pull out your old bag of tricks and none of them work. You said, well, geez, what else am I going to do? And then I like what Mike said. It's kind of like, he launched a product there. So kind of like, well, you feel like you accomplished something, and it's easy to run, but you don't want to run to your point, Storm, like, well, geez, what did I run to?
Mhm.
So I would say it's easy to run, and maybe it's the right decision, but I also say, give yourself a time limit. Don't leave it open-ended, to try to give it a shake. And I like Mike's idea too. Like, talk to someone, say, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't these, and give them a chance to say, yeah, let me help you fix that, or, tough, right? And then that kind of seals the deal as well.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate the perspective. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions? This is like Stump the Expert, I feel. This is a good one.
So I kind of want to speak a little bit. Like, I think Tyson put in the chat that, Mike, out of the conference, right? I picked up a couple of podcasts. One of them is Product Love. And so there was I think last fall, there was an interview of Radhika Dutt. She wrote Radical Product Thinking, where in chapter 2, she lists out 7 product diseases. And some of them are quite insightful, right? And the one that I actually stood out to me a lot is that, as product people, like, should we, we know that we've been told, like, we are taught to be customer focused, right? Centered. But should we create product that's vision-led or customer-led, right? And she talks about it sometimes, like, if we actually always getting customer feedback and making changes to things, we actually bastardize the vision that were originally set for that product, and we're not really getting to where we're supposed to deliver, or to create and create the change that we want to bring about. So I thought that was really good. The other one was about hero, right? Like, like, if you're working with VCs, you always want to sign up to do, like, democratize the market, getting more product set shares, and then you're not getting the products that you really, that answer, like, that solve the problem that your customer really needs. So I encourage everybody to read that. It's actually a really fun book to read.
I like that. Radhika's great. And by the way, fun fact, Eric Boduk, the host of Product Love, from Pittsburgh. So there you go. There's a connection.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Pendo. And Pendo, right?
Pendo, yeah.
Pendo.
I have a
That's right.
Pendo cup from
That's right.
from the conference.
Yep.
Mhm.
Love it.
Cool. Any other questions for Mike or just general comments about tonight's topic? Yes. Arrow's raising his hand, then we'll go to Stephen.
Hey, thanks, Stephen, and Mike. Hello. I'm actually speaking from Hong Kong. I'm a big fan of the Walkership FM, the podcast that Mike co-hosts with Michael Saka. I've been listening to it for a long period of time for me to learn about product management. So I would like to ask about the podcast, Walkership FM. How do you think about this podcast? Is it all about product management, or is it something else? What is the positioning of this podcast for this day, or has it been evolving from the day one until today? How do you feel this podcast for now? Just my question.
Thanks for that question, and good seeing you again. I remember we've been in contact a while too. I remember you put together your very first actually, I feel like it was a virtual product conference before virtual product conferences were cool. I remember you doing that, Arrow. So yeah, Rocketship, I've been a co-host since 2016, but it started in 2014, I think. So Michael actually started it with two other people that I don't know if they were at the time, but they eventually became a husband and wife and eventually had a baby together. And that's kind of how I became a co-host. So when they left, Michael asked if I would step up as a co-host, but I actually first met him because I was a guest on the show. Way back when, almost 10 years ago, I wrote a book called Startup Seed Funding for the Rest of Us on a different topic other than product. It was about raising startup capital outside of a major tech hub. And I self-published it. And so I'm like, how do I, let me promote it. Let me get on the podcast circuit. So it was fun for me. So I reached out to other podcasts and other places trying to promote the book. And I remember when I reached out to Michael at that time, Rocketship was more of an interview-based podcast and it was focused on entrepreneurs. So it was more, welcome Nate to the show. And I just interview Nate and the whole interview is the podcast. Well, I remember when I reached out to him, by the way, he's like, well, we don't usually take pitches, but maybe we can have a call. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to be in Las Vegas for work next week, but maybe the week after. And he's like, I live in Las Vegas. Maybe we can meet up in person. And so we met up in person and just hit it off. And then I was a guest on the show. And later on, Michael knew that I was starting Product Collective. It was actually right at that time where I was launching Product Collective, where his two co-hosts had a baby and they were going to be stepping away. So he needed another co-host and he asked if I would join. And so at first it was entrepreneur focused. Then we realized a lot of product people listen to it. So what we say now is it's a podcast for entrepreneurs and product people. The difference though is that we went away from that interview format a long time ago because there are so many podcasts that have that interview format. And number two, this is like a creative endeavor for us. Like it's more of a creative outlet for us. Like I don't journal or write in a diary. It's like instead, some people might do that as a creative outlet. Some people might paint. We podcast. Like we love writing up stories and bringing them to life. We try to bring stories to life that we think are relevant or would be of interest to entrepreneurs and product people, but it's not meant to be a prescriptive podcast. Like it's not meant to say like, listen to this episode and you will, you're going to learn X, Y, and Z. As an example of that, like we do seasons and every season is its own focus. Next season, it's all about Web3 stories. And we treat a lot of our podcast episodes as storytelling. I see the logo there. Thank you, Arrow. So we love telling those stories. Meaning one story, we might incorporate multiple interviews. I might incorporate audio that I found online from, some other place. And anyway, so that's our take on it. Little different than other product podcasts. I don't even call it a product podcast, but we like to say it's a podcast for entrepreneurs and product people.
Got it. Thank you. So it is more about just for entrepreneur. Got it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And product people. I mean, we're like telling the stories. It's not necessarily as prescriptive. It's more like, edutainment, I guess, for product people and entrepreneurs.
Got it. Sorry, can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
I just want to shout out to the style of the Walkership.fm podcast, because the style from day one until today, it is evolving all the time, and the style keeps changing. It is very entertaining for educational pieces, and that's why it is so captivating for audience to listen. So that's why I have listened to it for years.
Thank you. That's awesome to hear. I love that. Thank you so much.
I think someone needs to start a Mike Belsito fan club. And then there's I know at least two members, two people that have joined.
That might be all, but even still, I mean, we can still do it.
Steven, you had a comment earlier? Question?
Yeah, so I had to jump in and out. So if you discuss this, I apologize, but around analytics. So we need to we have no analytics in our product because it just went web-based about 3 years ago. So it's kind of like, the question is, well, what do you want to capture? And that's a massive question. And I read somewhere that you should about your analytics as beliefs, not just like how many people logged in, how many clicked on this button. So how would you begin to even build a list of like, what do you want to capture without having the list be pages and pages of noise?
Mike, I have an answer, but I want to hear what you're saying.
What I was gonna say is I'd love to hear from other people that have either are going through it or gone through it. So actually, please.
Yeah. So the way that, like, I mean, I think that sometimes I look at it, or it's like, understand your leading indicators and lagging indicators, and how you want to drive your business. Like, because some of them, yeah, and then pick a few, not too many.
I put in there the acronym goal question metric, and it was something I got from the quality groups I belong to. And basically is what you want to link them. So what's your goal and what are your questions around that goal? And over time, you may have the same goal, but as things mature and they become automated, institutionalized, you don't have the same questions. Like, back to the car analogy, I would imagine you want to know something different back in the 1920s, 1960s, et cetera, et cetera. We used to have the timing belt. I don't know if anybody remembers a timing belt. Every 80,000 miles, you had to change it. I had a Mazda that I got over 300,000 miles on. I changed the timing belt 3 times. When I got my new car that was used, the first question I asked was, when was the timing belt changed? And was told, well, we don't have those on cars anymore. So again, the goal may be to keep the car running, but the questions change. Therefore, the metrics may change. And I think if you keep it simple, back to aligning, I think in any complicated role or responsibility where you're cutting across groups, it's alignment is a key. Are you aligning what you're doing with what other people want or need you to do, including the customer and all your other partners and service providers? I think alignment is a common issue, which may not be looked at that way. Does that make sense?
Cool. Very good. Okay, Nick Hill. I don't know if I'm saying that right. He chatted. He has a question, so go for it.
Thank you for giving me a chance. So I have a question about how does the discovery go? So for example, I'm building a financial app, right? And what I'm building is to enable people to do investments and to track their investment. Now I want to get a dashboard that's a landing page where I want them to see the basic information and have all the action buttons. But how do I go about discovering it, and what should be an ideal landing page is? So there are 2 ways that I have taken raise. I am analyzing my customers, my competitors to see what they have designed, take clues from them, and then I have my own bias being in this industry for more than a decade. But what should be the right way, right, to get to this discovery and say that, okay, this is the new age dashboard. I'm talking about dashboard, but then it boils down to pretty much everything that we do. But then how should we go about this?
Just to clarify that, the dashboard you're referring to, it would be specifically related to discovery for your product? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so basically it'll be a landing page where the customer sees the first, right? And of course, what I'm interested about, not about a new customer, but someone who has already made investment and he's coming back to the app and he wants to see certain information. Now, my bias says that he would like to see how much money he has made or he has lost, right? But then we have that background, right? And I know that I can come up with something similar based on that background. But how do I go organically, about doing the research and building the next best thing?
Yeah, got you. Yeah, I will say we've had a few conversations with Laura Klein, specifically on the topic of like the UX of data. And if you want, you could feel free to email me. I could send you the videos to link back because it would be better to watch them. What I remember from it though is that sometimes it's the experience that the person has of accessing that data is almost just as important as the data itself. You could put whatever you want on that dashboard, but if they don't access the information that they actually need, and they might not know the information that actually would be most beneficial to them, they might tell you like, yeah, I want to see how much money I have. And maybe that is what's most important, but maybe there are other important things that they don't even know yet, but if they did access it, like it makes it for a better experience. So I'd love to hear what other people have to say, but I would like to send you those videos. So yeah, send me a note and maybe I'd send that over to you.
So what I would add was to ask them, because in my organization, we have this one example recently where it has to do with e-sign, right? And as product people, we map out the user journey based on what we know and things like that. But at the end, when we did user training, the customer hated it. They go, why do I need to do this? Like, why can't I do that? So I think that at the end, it's really important to ask, the people that actually use the tool, use the thing, and to get better insight, because a lot of times, we have our own biases, like Mike's just said earlier, right? Like a lot of biases based on our training, our background, our experience. But those things may not really answer that questions. Like, it's just a set of bias. So, I actually read Adam Grant's book called Think Again. And he talks about this point is that sometimes, when we reach this point of our career, we think we know a lot, but we don't. And we really need to, understand the data and understand how the world has changed and how people are interacting with what you're working on, like, the product you're trying to sell. And I think that was a really key learning for me too.
Nicole, I would add 2 words. One was rather than towards the end, I would say at the beginning. And I would also make the comment of prototype, involve the real people. And the prototype doesn't have to be a working system. It could be something as simple as a piece of paper where you say, either this is a system I have, how would you do this? How would you go about this goal? Or how would you do this task? Or it could be, here's a layout. It could be just a set of cards saying, here's a layout, which is kind of like somewhat your site architecture. What do you think? Do these words resonate? And having that simple, front end, like I say, very low fidelity prototype will answer a lot of questions and prevent you from doing unnecessary development. But look up those concepts as well as affinity diagram or card sorting. Those will tell you some tools that UXers use to do that type of experimentation.
Sure. Thank you, Randy.
I want to make a quick comment on something that you mentioned, Anna, and that was, learning. I think essentially learning how much we don't know. And one of the things that I have learned as I have gotten older is that the more that I learn, the more I understand how little I know. Right. And I think that's almost like the smartest people that I know have an understanding of how much more they have to learn. Like,
Well, humility is definitely a key skill set that leads to empathy, and and that's so critical for product people.
Great discussion. So how about one more question / comment / ringing endorsement for Mike, and then we'll call it a night. Who's got one?
I've got one, Nate.
All right, Dan, it's all you. Make it a good one
So-
because you're the last one. Otherwise, we'll take a different last one.
Well, I love opportunities like this, right? To get to talk product with other product people and even people that are much smarter about product than me, like Mike. But you know, I work really long hours, as we all know, product managers, right? So my Monday through Friday is just booked solid. And I almost want to find like an opportunity on a weekend where there's like, you know, maybe an all day conference or something that I can go to that has all of these topics. And unfortunately, my company doesn't really have much of a training budget. So I'd be looking for something that's, you know, pretty inexpensive. You know, is there something like that? Gosh, I wish there was just such a thing, right? Can you maybe
I
help
wish
point
it
me
was
in
at,
that in
like,
the
a
right direction?
sporting goods headquarters too. Like that would be a cool thing too, just to
Yes,
see,
right.
you know.
Yeah, not downtown, right? Like I don't need the mess of the downtown
wants
or
to park?
Oakland. That's crazy. It's got to be like, you know, suburbs.
Shameless promotion, Dan. Any real last questions?
By the way, I love it though. I was at that Pittsburgh product camp and I had a great time there. So I will second that from Dan. I do think that's worth checking out for everybody.
I heard it's on April
April 2nd.
2nd.
Yeah.
PGHPcamp.com. Anyone else for tonight? Going once. Going twice. Okay, so here's the deal, everybody. Thank you, Mike. Those of you who are still left, round of applause. That was fantastic, Mike. I enjoyed
Thank
it. I
you.
enjoyed
Thanks
the
for having me.
dialogue after. It was very good. We'll be back. I forget, March 29th, actually. I remembered exactly what it was. Christine from Pendo is going to talk about product ops. You can view the replay on YouTube. I'll send out a link afterwards, or you search Product Tank Pittsburgh on YouTube. You'll see all of our replays up there from when we started recording. There's probably like 5 or 6 or 7. So this one will be out in the next 24 to 48 hours. So until we meet again, thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Nathan.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.